We are live. Hello, I am Michael Perry. If you are involved with organized dentistry, you probably already know me. I've been a dentist for 40 years, and for 20 of those 40 years, I've been a dental practice management consultant. I started my consultancy as a type of hobby, and it grew and grew, and it started taking up lots of time, and in 2014 the California Dental Association offered to acquire my consultancy, and I made a decision to stop practicing clinically. I sold my practice to a brilliant young dentist here in Santa Rosa, and in 2014 I went to work for CDA full-time. I did that for 4 years, first as the Director of Practice Management and later as a strategic counselor for the Dentist Service Company. And since I left CDA in 2018, I have been doing private consulting for dentists. And the COVID-19 pandemic and the commensurate lockdown have changed the business of dentistry dramatically. So my job today is to talk about the new normal as best we can assess it right now. We have a great deal of uncertainty in the marketplace, and when you have uncertainty, you have less predictability. I am going to focus on the business side of dentistry today. We only have an hour, and so I won't be talking about PPE implementation and other clinical factors. A couple of housekeeping issues. We welcome questions. If you have questions, our executive director here at REDS, Martin Van Tassel, will receive those questions if they're typed in on the REDS website. So you want to have access to the REDS website, and he will transfer those questions over to me, and I'll do the best I can. If questions arise during the program, it may be that I will answer them in the moment, but some of the questions I'll get to at the very end of the program. So here we go. Oh, by the way, we have 1 unit of continuing education for this program, and there's a questionnaire that you can access also on the REDS website at the end. I created 5 questions at Martin's direction, and you'll need to answer those questions in order to get your continuing education unit. So what we're going to talk about is a changing marketplace, and we're going to talk about a very uncertain marketplace. This marketplace is like the one that exists in many other industries, and I know dentistry is a profession. Some people don't like to call it an industry, but I think in a business sense it is like other service industries. And so we're going to focus on the business side of things today, not so much the clinical side. I'll give you a little bit of philosophy right at the beginning, and then I'm going to give a brief history of dental benefits, because dental benefits are having a huge effect on what's going on in the dental marketplace today. I will also outline for you the areas of focus in running a private practice. I won't be able to do a deep dive into any of those topics, but I want you to know in general, in outline form, all the areas of focus that are currently required by a private practice owner, but I think some areas will require more emphasis considering what we're going through with COVID. And then I'm going to end the program, the last third of the program. I'm going to give you some statistics from ADA, from the American Dental Association, and comment on those statistics and do some prognosticating that will allow you to start to make some critical business decisions that you're going to need to be making in the coming months. Okay, so why dentist practice? My philosophy is dentist practice for the 3 reasons that you see on your screen. First of all, they are an altruistic bunch and they want to take care of people. That's their orientation from the very beginning. They want to be fulfilled in what they do, and that includes how they feel about the services that they're providing, how they feel about the dental procedures they're doing, and the results that they're getting on a regular basis. And then finally, they want to be reasonably compensated for what they do. They want to be profitable. If you Google the eras of dental benefits, you won't find the bullets that are on your screen. These have come from my thoughts and experience really being around dentistry all my life. My father was a dentist in the 50s all the way into the 90s. He was a pediatric dentist, and he started in practice before dental benefits existed. Dental benefits did not exist anywhere in the world until 1954 when they came to Washington State. That's when the WDS, the Washington Dental Service, started, and that is, of course, Delta Dental of Washington. 1955, dental benefits came to California in the form of the CDS, which, as I'm sure most of you know, is Delta Dental of California. So Delta Dental was the very first dental insurance company. It was started through, in part through efforts of many CDA members, and there's been quite an evolution of dental benefits, and as you probably know, some conflict between Delta Dental and organized dentistry in recent years. The golden age of dentistry, I think it's more of a myth than anything else, but it was that period of time when dental benefits existed and the benefits were driving lots of patients into dental offices, patients that weren't accessing services before, and the benefits that those patients were coming in with were paying for a very large percentage of the services that were received. In 1979, when I started in practice, we would negotiate our Delta Premier fee schedule, and then we would set all of our UCR fees at the same level as that fee schedule. Somewhere in the 1980s, we started to evolve into a time where dental benefit fees were not keeping up with the cost of providing services. Part of this was new technology coming into the profession, but there was a period in the 80s and on into the 90s when many dentists started to have multiple fee schedules. Their UCR fee schedule, their market rate, for most of them would be their highest fee schedule, and then if they were a contracted provider with Delta Dental or one of the other insurance companies, they would have a different fee schedule based upon those provider contracts. And we have seen a huge evolution of those provider contracts, and we have reached, in my opinion, a critical point with that aspect of the business of dentistry. The remuneration that's offered through most of the PPO provider contracts has gotten to a point where it is pushing dentists to a point of having to evaluate, does it make economic sense to be contracted providers with many of those companies. And I'm going to talk more about that at the end of the program. So the current dental benefits marketplace, what is going on currently? Well, it's obvious to all of us that COVID is going on right now, and we're having to deal with PPE implementation, but COVID to me is only one of the major variables that is in play. One of the problems in talking about this, because there's a tendency in our society today to take soft science and act like it's hard science. There's a tendency when we're talking about economics or social behavior to act like that there are experts that know exactly what's occurring. And with soft science, as opposed to the hard science that we had to deal with when we were trained, both as undergraduates and as dental students, we're used to people having answers. And the truth is that to predict what is going to be happening in the marketplace even a year from now is very difficult to do because we cannot control all of the variables, and there may even be some variables that come into play in the future that we're not even aware of now. So if we're predicting if we're making strategic decisions for the next 6 months, we can be fairly accurate in assessing the variables that we know about. But the further out we go, the more uncertain it gets. So just realize that I'm going to give you information today that's based upon my experience. It's based largely on anecdotal evidence that I have gathered myself, although I do have a fair amount of hard data, mostly from the ADA. Okay, so I talked about COVID being a huge change. It's probably the major variable in a sense of what is acute in the dental marketplace right now. But in my opinion, what has been happening to dental benefits over many years is just as large a factor as COVID. The dental benefits marketplace, if you have been involved as a contracted provider, you know that in real dollars the pricing of dental services has been shrinking. Real dollars meaning adjusted for inflation. And so for many of the procedures that you provide, particularly if you're a solo practitioner or you're in a very small private practice, you are offering some services today that I would say you're probably offering it below the cost of providing the service. And so you have a certain number of patients that are on higher fee schedules that are subsidizing the patients that are on the lower fee schedules. Oh, and I need to make this second bullet because it's one of the questions that you're going to have to answer if you want to get your CE. We have 3 groups of specialists that are going to experience a fee cut from Delta Dental at the end of this year. That is the periodontists, the endodontists, and the oral surgeons. They have all enjoyed the ability to charge even their lower level Delta PPO patients. Delta has 2 different programs, the Premier program and the PPO program. The PPO program has the lower fee schedule. The endodontists, oral surgeons, and periodontists have been able to charge all Delta patients, regardless of the plan that the patient comes in with, Premier fees. That's going to end at the end of this year, and the net effect of that will be a rather large fee cut for those 3 groups of specialists. So I need for everyone to understand the concept of indemnity dental benefits. Indemnity is a legal term. It's largely used to, in reference to insurance. And indemnity plans in dentistry have been those traditionally that didn't have provider networks attached to them. If a patient came in with a pure indemnity plan back in 1979 when I was first in practice, that plan could be billed and utilized by any dentist that the patient came to. There was no contracted provider network. So the dentist would charge his or her UCR fees, and the patient would get the benefit that they're going to get, and the patient's out-of-pocket would be the difference between the benefit and the doctor's UCR fee. The other type of indemnity relationship, which has grown dramatically in the marketplace, you can see the difference on your screen, is the virtual indemnity, and that's my term. What that means is there's a plan where you could be a contracted provider, you choose not to be a contracted provider, but a patient comes to you because of perception of value, and you render services for them as an out-of-network provider. And most of you who have PPO provider agreements also see patients who have insurance that you're not contracted with. So I'm going to just organize our thoughts, I'm going to say that you have an indemnity relationship with those patients who come in with insurance plans that you're not contracted with. If you're not contracted with any insurance plan at all, even Delta Dental, then you are insurance independent and you have an indemnity relationship with every person that comes in that you provide services for that has insurance. And then of course you would have some patients that don't have insurance, and those are patients that are of course also paying off of your UCR fee schedule. Now this bell-shaped curve that you see on your screen is an abstract rendering of a phenomena in the marketplace that existed back in the 1970s. If we say this bell-shaped curve was a snapshot of the first year I was in practice, what existed in 1979, the vertical axis is dentists in California, and the horizontal axis, as you go from left to right, on the far left would be doctors that are contracted with, they're contracted providers with low fee PPO plans, and the ones in the middle are the ones that are contracted with high fee PPO plans, and then over on the right, the tail over on the right would be those that are not contracted with any PPO plans. So three groups: low fee, high fee, not contracted at all, as you go from left to right across the horizontal axis. And the reason it looks like such an even bell-shaped curve is back in 1979, the vast majority of licensed dentists in California were contracted with Delta Dental. They only had the Premier program at that point, and most of those dentists were setting their UCR fees based upon their Delta Premier fee schedule. And so you have that very large central area that was occupied by most of the licensed dentists in California. So how has that changed? Once again, this is another abstract rendering. I can't tell you that the scale is correct on the hills and valleys that you see, but as a concept, I think it paints a picture of what is occurring in the marketplace today. You have, on the far left, you have the group of dentists that are contracted with low-fee PPOs. The typical dentist in California, on average, has 3 PPO contracts, including one with Delta Dental. And the vast majority of those Delta Dental contracts are for the lower fee PPO, and since the lower fee PPO dominates the market, since the Delta Premier plans, which were the only thing that existed in 1979, have almost disappeared entirely from the marketplace, we now have just a few dentists left that have the older contracts that allow them to charge all Delta patients their Premier rate. So the dip that is in the middle of this graphic is those dentists, I'm going to call those the grandfather and grandmother dentists, that have those older Delta agreements that allow them to charge all of their patients Premier rates. That's a shrinking number because those provider agreements are not transferable in any way to another dentist. So as those dentists retire, those grandfather arrangements, those grandfather provider agreements disappear with them. So that valley is going to, in the coming years, get lower and lower until it actually goes to zero at some point. And so, but over on the right, that second bump on the right side of the screen, those are the practices that are leaving the PPO networks. And of course, the one that is most significant is Delta Dental. So the number of practices that are leaving the Delta Dental provider agreement, that's an increasing number. So what we're seeing is, as this graphic evolves in the coming years, I think we're going to see the valley in the middle get lower, and I think we're going to see the bump on the right get bigger. That's my prediction. So another concept, COVID-19 is what an author who wrote 2 bestsellers within the last 20 years is calling a black swan event. A black swan event refers to a metaphor. If you live near a lake where swans spend time, and you're there over a lifetime and you only see white swans, you make the assumption that only white swans exist. And a black swan landing on the lake would be an extremely rare event that you might or might not see one time in your lifetime. So these are extremely rare events. But in the author's telling in the book, if you have a black swan event within an economy or within a society, it has a dramatic effect, and these events are not predictable. Nassim Taleb is the author of This particular book, Fooled by Randomness, I just think it's a wonderful book. He's one of the innovative thinkers of our time, in my opinion. Later on, he wrote a book which I think was a bigger seller called The Black Swan, but it just shows how so much of what occurs within social systems, whether they be economic systems, other types of social systems, is fairly random. And people that do well within those changes are oftentimes just very lucky. And so I think it's a sobering book, but it's also a book that helps you think differently about these events that occur very, very rarely. I get a kick out of the news media that tells us that we should have been able to predict all of these things, and yet the last pandemic was about 100 years ago. And my feeling is that we've had two black swan events in the last 10 years. We had the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and now we have COVID going on. So I think for your own peace of mind and to organize yourself as a business owner, it's well worth reading this book. Okay, these next two slides, I am going to be showing you in bulleted form a way of organizing yourself around the business of dentistry. I can't give an entire management course today. I couldn't possibly do it in an hour. I couldn't even do it in a day. But I want you to have a sense of what are all the categories of business systems that you need to deal with if you are a practice owner or you aspire to being a practice owner. The first slide, the one you're looking at now, these are all of the leadership systems. The creation of a vision and then following that with an action plan, which is basically a timeline. ROI analysis just has to do with your ability to estimate a return on investment. And then all of the human resource issues, the reason that I have staff management in green is based upon what's going on in COVID and what is happening with employees in dental practices. It's going to be very important that practice owners raise their game in the area of staff management. So if you're just used to a certain form of behavior, in my opinion, getting training in staff management and efficiency would be a great place to put your effort right now. The next slide is a larger list, and these are all of the management systems that occur when you own a dental practice. The four that I'm singling out on this list are the patient scheduling, because COVID has created efficiency issues. Because of implementation of PPE, you're not able to schedule patients as efficiently as you did before. So if you're going to maintain a healthy cash flow, your scheduling strategy is going to be more important than it was before. And then case presentation is your ability to get patients efficiently to see the benefits of what you're recommending to them. It is going to be more important than ever that you do dentistry in an efficient way. In the old days, if a patient had 10 cavities, we might have 10 appointments for 10 fillings. Now we need to use modern clinical techniques to, when we sit that patient down, to do more dentistry in a shorter period of time while maintaining the clinical quality that of course is so important to all of us. Overhead management, because our cost of doing business has largely stayed the same, even though we have issues with COVID that are creating inefficiencies. In other words, there is no way with implementation of PPE that we can produce as much as what we did before. We have to do all these things that take up time. And we have to purchase supplies that we didn't have to purchase before. So that puts pressure on overhead. And so our ability to manage our overhead, that's just another area that we need to focus on right now. And then the last one is marketing. Your ability to have a flow of patients that allows you to operate near your capacity is going to be much more important. When I show you some statistics in a few slides, I think that'll become more clear. Okay, so the ADA statistics that I'm going to show you are going to come from a webinar that was produced on June the 29th. The next webinar that ADA is going to show, which will update the statistics that you're going to see today, is actually this Tuesday. And if you have time, I highly recommend that you watch this webinar. The ADA has done a wonderful job of putting the statistics together in an understandable format that they can show you fairly succinctly. And I certainly intend to watch it. And it is recorded, so if you can't watch it live, you can see the recording of it later. But it'll help you understand what's going on nationally in dental offices. So the Health Policy Institute is just one of the subsidiaries of ADA, and their goal is to track certain statistics so they can help members get closer and closer to a clear vision of what the new normal is going to be in private practice. Okay, you need to orient yourself with this graphic. First of all, this graphic looks at 8 weeks of statistics going from the middle of March through the end of June. And the 4 colors that are there, if a practice is open for business as usual, and that's the dentist saying that we are fully open and we're doing elective procedures and all of the other procedures that we normally do, that's in green. Yellow is we're seeing a lower patient volume than usual. And orange is closed for emergency. That was true of many practices during the lockdown. You were only seeing emergency patients, so that's the orange. And then the red is completely closed. And so you can see on the lower vertical stripe that by the end of June, practices were open for business as usual less than half the time. So even though most dentists were open, I think most dentists opened by early to mid-June, by the end of June they were still only operating at a 40% level. So the insight that the ADA points out in that box in the lower right, the week of June 29th, 97% of dental practices were open, but only 42% of them reported that they were in business as usual. This graphic is about staff. And we're going to assume that if you're paying staff, that they are working for you. We're not talking about staff that you chose to pay in spite of the fact that they weren't in the office working. I know some dentists did that. So you can see, once again, it's the same 8-week period as the previous slide. And you can see that by June the 29th, 87% of the dentists were saying that I am paying my staff as I did before. I'm fully paying my staff. So, but what we've also seen as we got toward the end of June, the pace of rehiring the staff got slower and slower. It'll be very interesting to see what the ADA shows us on Tuesday about this, because it appears that on average dental practices, there may be about 10% of the staff people that are either not being invited back or they are choosing not to come back. And so it doesn't look like very much over there on the lower right, but if you have 10% of your staff not coming back for the typical solo practice, that might be you're going to work with one less individual than you were working with before. Now with this graphic, the only one that I'm going to talk about is the upper one. This is going from the beginning of May all the way till the end of June, and this upper graphic references dentists that are employee dentists, aka associates. So if you're an associate dentist, you have only come back at the 2/3 level. We only have 2/3 of the associates nationwide that are working the same hours they were working before the lockdown. So the return of associate dentists to private practice dentistry has occurred much more slowly than with other staff members. So this is a concern. This is a concern that, of course, many of the associates are our younger members, and we want to be sure that they're taken care of. And they, according to the statistics, the marketplace is not allowing them to get back up to full speed as quickly as it is the owner dentists, the older dentists. Now this is a statistic, I learned this from watching the webinar, that was gained from an outside entity. This is not information that the ADA gathered directly. They got it from the outside in order to have a fairly large sample size. This is such a critical statistic. This is patients returning to the dental office and the patient's attitudes about returning to the dental office. So as of June the 29th, if you look at the dark green, you have 18% of the patients. And when we're talking about patients, we're talking about the number of people in your patient base. And so just because of the timing of recall, it may not be time for some patients to have come back into your office. So of your active patient base, and you might measure that as your active patient counts would be the total number of people that have been in your office for any service at least one time in the last 18 months. That's a fairly industry-wide statistic. That's the way it's measured typically. So if you, as of June the 29th, we've had 18% of the patient bases return to the office for services. And then we have this large kind of sea green area, 55%, that if they have an appointment or they need to access the services, they're ready to go. If they have a dental problem and they call, they will get appointed. If they have a recall appointment and it's their time to come in, they're ready to go. They there's no resistance to them returning. So if you take those two greens and you put them together, you've got the 18% and the 55%. You've got 73% of the patients that have either already been in or ready to come in. And then you've got the yellow one, which is the assurance seekers. Those are the patients that will come in if you can assure them that it's going to be safe. And so this is a group of patients where you have a communication challenge. You need to talk with them about PPE. You need to talk with them about the science as we know it now, so they feel comfortable that it's reasonably safe for them to come into the dental office. But the big one is the red one. According to this survey, 15% of the patients that regularly go to the dentist, so this is 15% on average of your patient base, will refuse to return to the dental office until there's a vaccine. And all of you can guess just as well as I can from reading the news when we will actually have a vaccine. But if you're going to take 15% of your customer base, you have a service business, which is what your dental practice is, and you're going to take 15% of the patient base, and the customer base, and they're not going to come and access services, that's a significant shrinkage of your business. So we know that for most dental practices, a certain number of patients are not going to return probably until next spring, if that's when we wind up with the vaccine. I'm not sure. But this particular graphic was rather stunning to me, that such a large percentage of people that go to the dentist regularly tend to be better educated and more responsible, more health oriented, and for them to have so much anxiety that they feel that it's not safe to go to the dentist until there's a vaccine, that's a rather surprising statistic. Okay, core question. This has to do with patient volume, and we're going to associate patient volume with production. As you all know, if you own a dental practice, you measure production in dollars. So we're going to correlate the patient volume, the number of people coming in, with the production. We're going to assume that the amount of dentistry that you do per patient as they return post-lockdown is going to be the same as it was before. And part of the reason I tell you that is it's one of the questions on your CE questionnaire. So what we have is, you can see the graphic where purple is less than 5%, and when you were in lockdown and you were only seeing emergencies, you were maybe some days not going into the dentist at all, and you certainly weren't very productive. And as you got more and more productive, over time, we get to the week of June the 29th, and we've got, if you look at the green over on the far right of the lower vertical bar, you've got a little over half of the practices are operating at 3/4 efficiency or greater. They are operating at 76% of total patient volume or greater. And the aggregate of that, if you average all of the practices that were surveyed the week of June the 29th, the average practice in the United States is operating at 70% of its productive volume. So 70% of the number of patients that were seen before, assuming that the production volume per patient is equivalent to what it was pre-lockdown. In a word, we're operating at 70% of efficiency. We are operating at 70% of our productive ability comparing what we had before. So basically, what we're saying is our businesses are down on average 30%. If you look at a measurement of capacity, if you take the average practice nationally, so this includes large practices, small practices, it could include practices that see 100 patients a day, it could include practices that only see 10 patients a day. But on average, practices nationally have seen 32 patients a day. That would include hygiene, restorative, and a general practice. If you're a specialist, the array of services that you supply as a specialist. So the capacity, meaning the greatest number based upon that practice's ability to see and treat patients, which includes all of the efficiencies that they have in their business systems, on average that was 32. So that has now shrunk by almost exactly 25%. It's a little less than 24 patients is the maximum, and that's because of the inefficiencies that are created by implementation of PPE and other related factors. So what we're saying is your ability to produce has been cut 25%. Even if you're operating at maximum efficiency based upon modern averages, you can only produce 75% of what you did before. And what the lower bar, the green bar, shows is what's actually occurring. And so what's actually occurring is the average dental office is seeing a little over 20 patients a day. So the actual is very, very close to what's actually occurring. What we're seeing is, as opposed to what was occurring before the lockdown, many offices before the lockdown were operating at below capacity. In other words, they could have taken more patients. They would have liked to have had more patients. But now offices are in large measure taking all of the patients that they can, or at least on average they're very close to doing that. And so the need for you to be efficient, the need for you to maximize the efficiency of your business systems, and of course all of your clinical systems as well, so you can maintain your quality of care but also get your revenue stream up to a higher level. This is a big challenge. The implementation of PPE is slowing you down, and it's diminishing your ability to produce, even though your costs of your business costs, your overhead, have remained largely the same, or for some they've even gone up. So out of this, dentists are evaluating their business strategies, and there are a number of business strategies that they're looking at. One of the big ones has to do with the dental benefits issue that I talked about in the introduction. What we would like from insurance companies is for them, because they continue to take in all the premium dollars that they have enjoyed, even during the lockdown when dentists weren't providing services, so dentists weren't filing claims for benefits, so the amount of money that insurance companies were paying out diminished, but the insurance companies so far, primarily Delta Dental, have refused to, in any substantive way, increase the benefits to help pay for the cost of keeping patients safe and staff safe. So I've got this rather cynical slide up on your screen where Delta Dental has offered for a temporary period of time, for a 4-month period of time, to raise the fees for certain kinds of exams and consultations $10. So if you're a general practitioner and you see 2 new patients a day and you do 5 periodic exams a day, that's kind of an arbitrary statement, then the amount of increased production that you would get through this Delta Dental benefit is only $70 a day. It's almost insignificant and certainly grossly inadequate. And because of that, and because of the low fee trend, the reduction in pricing that has been occurring, you could argue for decades, with the pricing of dental services through these PPO contracts, with Delta Dental being the biggest one, many dentists are considering, does it make economic sense for them to stay in the network? We have a question that just came in. We understand that our practices have been impacted by COVID. What I want to know is how best to address this situation to survive. Do you have any specific recommendations? Well, it's really the overriding question that I mean to address in the whole program. When somebody says, when they talk about surviving, they're talking about an acute situation that has to be handled short term. It is going to be very important for each practice to evaluate their cash flow. Cash flow and profitability are not the same thing. Cash flow, I call that the oxygen of the business. You have to have a certain amount of money flowing through the system in order to pay the overhead, and for most dentists, their profitability is also paying for their life and for the needs of their family, and so we have to have the overhead covered and we have to have a certain amount of cash flow in order to live on. That's the minimum. And profitability is measured through different algorithms, largely so you can determine how much tax you owe to the government. And so if you are in a negative cash flow situation, you are going to have to take emergency measures in order to maintain your cash flow. You have to be able to pay your debts, you have to be able to pay other aspects of your overhead, and you have to have enough money to survive. So I believe that addresses the immediate issue, that if you are talking about survival of your business, you are largely talking about a cash flow need. The government loan programs, many of which are really grant programs, meaning you don't have to pay them back, if you are having a severe cash flow problem, you need to maximally access those programs. There's the brand new HHS program, which the ADA just sent out some information on this week. And then the PPP program has been around since April, and the EIDL program as well. Those are programs where you can apply for money which will allow you to have enough cash flow to get through the slowdown that I've been describing through the ADA statistics. I got a big kick out of this flew into my inbox, my email inbox, maybe 2 months ago. And there's an implication from this slide that if you just register for this webinar, you're going to learn how to drop these PPOs that you have grown to dislike because of the very low levels of remuneration, and you're going to be happier and make more money. I was just dying to register for this and watch it, but I had a conflict and I didn't get to see it, so maybe some of you did. I certainly think a plan to transition from being contracted with certain PPOs, particularly Delta Dental, and transforming your business, there are a number of things that need to change, and in my experience it's something that you only get to do well one time. So I would discourage you from just watching a webinar and doing something drastic. I think it's important that it's a well-organized process that's well thought out. In my way of thinking, in private practice today, I divide practices into two big groups, and then there are some subgroups. The efficiency-based practices are the PPO-based practices. Some of them have HMO contracts as well. All of the what we call corporate practices or DSOs, they are all within this category, and they are able to leverage efficiency, and they are able to survive and even thrive with the low fees that PPOs offer today. And but they are already very efficient, so they're under a lot of stress because they have learned to process patients very quickly and efficiently, and PPE is slowing them down just like it's slowing everybody else down, and so it's creating a problem that in one way of thinking is harder for them to solve because they're already very efficient, at least the larger ones are. The solo practices that are efficiency-based, I think, are having a particularly difficult time because those solo practices that are efficiency-based have tended to be, on average, fairly low profit because a small practice can only provide so much dentistry in a day, and they don't have the ability to leverage administrative tasks and spread it out over a larger number of practices, and so they have the same administrative burden that the other practices have, that the ones that are not contracted with insurance have, and so I think those are the ones that are particularly challenged, and I think those are the ones that are evaluating their provider contracts and asking the question, would I be better off economically if I was not in this particular provider contract? And there are a number of variables that need to be evaluated in order to answer that question. As opposed to the relationship-based practices, in my way of knowing, none of the DSO and large corporate practices are what I would call relationship-based. Relationship-based practices are practices that require a lot of communication time, a lot of nurturing of patients, and in the DSO world you just don't have time to do that. They are dominated by the traditional solo practice like the one that I had during my entire career, and those, in my experience, this is anecdotal of course, they're doing better because they are not in a situation where their fees are controlled by a third party. If they need to change their fees because their costs have gone up, like with PPE implementation, they have the ability to do that, as opposed to the efficiency-based solo practices. Unless the insurance company is willing to alter their benefit structure, they don't have the ability to raise their prices commensurate with their increase in cost. If any of you need to communicate with me about a specific issue with your practice, my contact information is on the screen, It is now 12:49, so we've got about 10 minutes left. If there are any other questions, I would be happy to answer them. I think in general, I am by nature an optimist. My feeling is that just because we have COVID going on, dental disease is going to occur with our patients at the same rate that it did before. And so the demand for dental services, at least for health-related dental services, is going to remain largely the same. What is going to occur with discretionary services, I have opinions about that, but that's more guesswork than my comments about the health-related issues. What I am seeing from looking at other industries, for example, the auto industry and the real estate industry, we are seeing an increase in car sales. We are seeing an increase in residential real estate sales. And what some analysts have said is because Americans are stuck at home and they're not spending money on vacation and other recreational things, that they are spending more on themselves. I can tell you with some of the dentists that I work with, what's being reported to me by some of them is they are very busy providing discretionary services. These are things that implant restorative, orthodontics, cosmetic dentistry. Those are services that you might have thought would have diminished based upon what's going on in the dental marketplace, but some dentists are reporting to me that they're actually doing more of that than they did before. And so the theory is it's because patients have their discretionary income, their discretionary money is now being focused more on themselves than it was on things like travel and recreation. Question just came in. Can we bill patients extra for PPE? The answer to that question is it depends upon the patient. If the patient is coming to you and they have a dental benefit plan where you are a contracted provider, it depends upon the plan. The easiest example is to talk about Delta Dental because Delta Dental is very clear and very regimented in their rules. Right now, the only way to increase your payments from Delta Dental is via this increase in the exam fees that I talked about in an earlier slide. If you attempt to charge your patient more for PPE, either by adding it to an existing fee or using a separate code, some dentists have used the D1999 code, which is you're basically just charging a sterilization fee when you use that code. Delta Dental will not allow you to do that. That would be a violation of your provider contract. They will reject the claim and the EOB will state that you cannot charge the patient. And since you are compelled via your Delta contract to file a claim for every service that you provide on one of their insureds, everything that you do on a Delta patient, you must file a claim for it. And there are no exceptions to that. And so the answer to this question, if you are treating a Delta patient, is other than that $10 increase for exams, you cannot pass any of the PPE costs on to the patient. There are other insurance companies that will allow you to charge separately. The patient wouldn't get a benefit from some of these other insurance companies. The insurance company isn't going to pay more, but they won't bar you from charging the patient. So under those circumstances, yes, you can charge the patient more, but the patient will be paying that out of pocket. And then, of course, the easiest example is when you have a patient that's coming to you and they either don't have insurance or per my earlier comment, you have an indemnity relationship with them. They have an insurance you're not contracted with. Either you're insurance independent and you have no contracts, or this particular patient has a contract where you're not a contracted provider, and so you are free to charge those patients for PPE. Now there's the question of, is that a good business strategy to charge your patients for PPE? The anecdotal information that I have on that, which is largely talking to lots of dentists and maybe reading some things in the media, is that there's a percentage of people that don't like the fact that their healthcare provider is charging them for the safety measures that they should be offering for free. So, and I realize that with an individual patient, that's just a story that the patient has in their head. But if you're angering them by creating a PPE surcharge, I don't know if this is a particularly good time to be pressuring patients and testing the relationship in that regard. So my bias is toward, if you're going to increase your prices to accommodate the economic reality of PPE, my advice would be to bake it into all of your fees and not have it as a separate charge. We've got just a few more minutes. So unless another question comes in, I want to close by saying that I feel that the world is changing, and certainly the economy is changing with it. The dental marketplace is changing, but I have no reason to be pessimistic about being a practice owner or about being in the dental marketplace. I think the challenges that existed before COVID, most of them are still there. Most dentists are dealing with them fairly well. And I think our profession is one where the demand for our services stays fairly consistent. And based upon what I'm seeing in the practices that I have access to, where I can see their data, I'm seeing that most practices are doing fairly well if they are well led and well managed. If they've paid attention to the leadership systems that I had on the one slide and the management systems that I had on the second slide, they are doing well. I want to let everybody know that trainings for every one of those systems I've developed over many, many years, and my hair is getting grayer, and I made the decision a year ago to post all of those trainings at no charge on my website. And I've been able to put together a team of 6, so I'm one of the 6, subject matter experts in all of the different areas of practice leadership and practice management. The problem I've had is during COVID, I've been so busy I haven't been able to get the trainings recorded and onto my website as quickly as I would have liked. And in the end, there are going to be over 30 trainings, and we only have 5 of them on the website right now. So my promise to all of you is that by a year from now, they'll all be there. So that's not going to help you in the next 2 weeks, but I do want you to know that everybody is going to have access to quality leadership and practice management training. If you choose to access it, you will get the information that you need in order to be efficient. And so with that, I appreciate everybody's attention. It's always fun to come to Reds and do a program, and hopefully I will see many of you out there in the dental marketplace. So thank you.